Good evening, everybody. Can you all hear me okay? I mean, I'm gonna assume that y'all can hear me okay. My name is Eris. Welcome. I'm so excited to be with you all here tonight, launching Seven Mercies, the second installment in the best-selling Seven Devils duology. I'm blocking my notes by Elizabeth May and Laura Lamb. I want to welcome you on behalf of both Chimera Festival, Scotland's Festival of Sci-Fi, Fantasy, and Horror Writing, and Blackwell's Bookshop, who jointly organized this event. You can find information about that, future events, by visiting blackwells.co.uk and Chimera Festival, that's CYMERA, festival.co.uk. So some housekeeping before we get started. Elle and Laura are going to be popping into Blackwell's Elle and Elizabeth will be popping into Blackwell's to sign copies of Seven Mercies on 29th of January. So if you have purchased a book and ticket option, then we will be happy to arrange signed copies for you on that day, which will then be posted out to you. So they're not in the post yet because they haven't been signed yet. So if you have any questions about the book you've ordered, or want us to dedicate a copy with your name or anyone else's name in it, or the special message, please email Blackwell's events manager, Matthew, on matthewland.blackwells@gmail.com. And I am putting that email address right now into the chat, so you can take it down for your reference. All right, so we will, and finally, there will be time for audience questions at the end of tonight's event, the last like 15 minutes. So there's an ask a question button at the bottom of your Zoom panel, and you can put your questions in there at any time during the event. We'll be watching and keeping an eye on it. But I'll give you another reminder towards the end, so around 7:40 p.m. I'll leave you a little reminder and you can ask any questions that we've not covered in our Q&A. So I think it's time to jump in. Enough from me, except I'm going to be talking some more because I'm introducing our speakers tonight. Elizabeth May is the Sunday Times, hi Elizabeth, best-selling author of Seven Devils and Seven Mercies, co-written with Laura Lamb, hello, the Falconer series, and romance novels under the pen name Katrina Kendrick. She is Californian by birth and Scottish by choice, and holds a PhD from the University of St. Andrews. She currently resides on an 18th century farm in the Scottish countryside with her husband, 3 cats, and a lively hive of honeybees that live in the wall of her old farmhouse. They're probably all hibernating right now, I see.
So, they are not. They were really loud last night. Are they buzzing
about? Aw.
Yes.
Well, they were obviously buzzing about your book launch. Now we have Elle Lamb, originally from sunny California. Elle now lives in cloudy Scotland, as do all 3 of us. That's weird.
Yeah, that is weird.
Lamb is a Sunday Times best-selling author whose work includes the near-future space thriller Goldilocks, feminist space opera Seven Devils, co-written with Elizabeth May, False Hearts, and the companion novel Shattered Minds, and the award-winning Micah Gray series. Lamb's romance alter ego is Laura Ambrose. Lamb lectures part-time at Edinburgh Napier University on the creative writing MA. So let's talk about this book. Now, my first question tonight, Seven Mercies, I guess, well, all books are kind of about power, but Seven Mercies is very much about power and who can use power and what they use it for and what it means. So my first question is a really big one. What is power within the context of this story? Shall I just point to one of you?
Laura can go first.
Yeah,
Okay.
should we do the usual thing where I go first and then you, and just to keep it consistent?
Cool.
So I think power in this is a tool, so it reveals all of the weak points of various characters, which I think is really interesting from a narrative point of view. So you have people who are tempted by power, people who are trying to actively run away from power, and just like how insidious it can be as well. So even when you think you've escaped something, the past can come back to haunt you. This is a hard one because it's so like big and contextualized, and we have to dance around the spoilers. But yeah, I think like Power in this instance does a really good job of putting all of the characters in a pressure cooker.
Yeah, I mean, I think that you know, with this series, we have a very large group of people who are in positions where they lack power just in general, even over their own lives, over their minds, and that sort of thing. So even so I guess power in this context for these particular characters is in some ways about any kind of autonomy, because when you think about it, even something as simple as autonomy is power. It's power over yourself, over your own body, and your rights toward that own body, or toward your own body. And the characters in this book don't even have that, with the exception of like Eris, who specifically ran from essentially having all of the power in the galaxy. Because you know, because that came with responsibilities that she wasn't ready for, but it also came with uh corruption, because you know, too much power over other people as opposed to yourself can be a corrupting influence. And she realized that even though she would have power over other people, ultimately certain things that she would have to sacrifice were power over herself. And she learned that kind of through Xander, and Xander's mentions of like not having power over his own future, like basically her having to kill all of her siblings and that sort of thing. So it's just this idea of a perpetual fate of being responsible for the galaxy if you don't die. So I guess in this respect, you know, power in this book is having it just simply over your own life and your own destiny. And that's, you know, that's what's important to these characters.
Yeah, because there's so many themes of like autonomy, even bodily autonomy, and that it's not even power, but like a power differential.
Mm-hmm.
And that's this huge, unimaginable power differential that these characters are fighting against that makes the stakes so high for the story. And yeah, it's that pressure cooker that the characters are being put in. So there's like and that leads me into my next question, is there's a kind of messiness to the moral world that the characters live in. And I found that really compelling. Everyone is like compromised, and the line between doing like the right thing and the wrong thing is super blurry. What is the right thing? So why was it important to you guys to show the characters in these situations where there is no right or wrong thing to do, other than obviously, oh, it's a story, we have to create conflict?
Yeah. Well, I think a lot of the time people tend to show rebellions in really kind of like idealized lights. So you see it especially in, say, like Star Wars, which obviously is marketed towards kids. So there's only so bloody it can get. But, you know, you have the faceless kind of stormtroopers who get shot, you never see any blood, and no stormtrooper can shoot and hit anything ever, apparently. Whereas I think in real life, rebellions are really brutal and really messy and really bloody, and you have to show that. And then also too, our rebels we're all in some way cogs of the empire before they decided to rebel. So like none of their hands are clean, and we couldn't shy away from that. And they're all kind of dealing with the ramifications of what they've done and trying to atone for what they've done in different ways, which I thought was really interesting for us to investigate. And I think also to show too that even if you've realized you have done terrible things in the past, like for most people, like the best time to make a better decision is yesterday, and then the next best time is now, or whatever that saying is. So it's not like you are necessarily completely irredeemable. It doesn't absolve you of what you did in the past, but you can still work to try and undo it and make a better tomorrow, which sounds quite pithy, but I do think it's important for all of us to remember and to do and to work towards, even not in space.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, Elle and I both kind of agreed that, one thing that we wanted to do was have kind of a realistic idea of revolution and rebellion, and also a sense of atonement in the narrative. And these aren't things, they aren't necessarily like mutually exclusive things. One of the things that you read about in any kind of past revolution is the fact that any of the key players are responsible for any amount of deaths and that sort of thing. And not everybody is good, and everybody has to make certain questionable choices. And I thought that was an interesting narrative to play with regards to this, because not only are these characters pushed toward possibly doing morally gray things within the context of the revolution that they're currently in, but also because of their past. And Eris was a character that kind of allowed us to play a bit mostly in that context of her essentially doing all of the terrible things because her soul, she considers her soul to already be immensely bloodied, and doesn't want other people to have that responsibility, because she's like, oh, I'm already basically going to over and into the darkest depths, so best not give anybody else my fate there. So I thought that was an interesting kind of moral gray area to play with, but also within the context of atonement, something that that let us to talk about the context of making up for past mistakes, and exploring how those questionable acts can make somebody feel when they're in a context where they have to be confronted with it. And that was just sort of fun as an author to get to explore in different in a variety of different character ways. So
Yeah. So yeah, and I think well, that question of atonement, that's my next that was the next thing I was going to talk about, actually, which is thanks for for leading into that. Yeah, can you talk a little more widely about how the role that guilt and complicity and that possibility of redemption, because I think a lot of characters have to face sort of the blood on their hands, and since they're the protagonists of the story, we have to kind of allow them the possibility of redemption. Can you talk about how that plays out in this story?
I think literally every single character in there is trying to work towards redemption. Even those who maybe had less of a obvious role in the empire, like Chloe, for example, was in Mindalia, which is more kind of cut off from the empire, and she kind of went straight from there, being someone who's really oppressed and forgotten, into the rebellion. So she maybe doesn't have as many like war crimes to her past, but she's still been, creating these ships, or fixing these ships that have weapons that result in death as well. So they all know that every time they go out on a mission, there is a good chance that people will die. And Eris in particular, keeps count of people, and they're all really struggling. It just gets heavier and heavier the more they do it. But it's almost like at this point they have no other choice. Like they're so deep in the rebellion that it's this or die trying. And so having them kind of having to balance that like hope and hopelessness, I think was really interesting, and having to confront how they are all complicit, and how they can't shy away from it, as much as it would be easier to make excuses for themselves or to do something, to try and paint themselves as more heroic than they are. I don't think any of them do, which is really interesting.
yeah, and I think in terms of the characters, Chloe is probably the closest thing to like a moral voice we have in in the story, because she has not, most of the characters have been involved in the military, in some way, or have fought and killed a number of people. And there is a scene in Seven Mercies, spoiler, like this is not really a big spoiler or anything, but there is a scene in Seven Mercies where Chloe and Rhea meet with the Evoli, and the Evoli leader basically tells them that they can't seek refuge on the planet because anybody in the military, in the Tholosian military, they refuse to allow them to seek refuge on that planet because they are responsible for the deaths of their people, and their people's safety comes first.
Mhm.
And it was a moment where Chloe was basically like, oh, all of my friends, you mean? Like,
Yeah, I guess I can technically maybe sneak my way in, but
but all of her friends would not, would they, and she thinks to herself, okay, and like, how, in what ways am I also complicit? Because when you think about it, she came up with the weapon in book 1 that ended up killing somebody as well, and she's like, okay, so am I now I have that person's death on my conscience. And how many deaths does Eris have on her conscience, and how many deaths does Nyx have on her conscience? Even though she was brainwashed at the time, every single one of them has taken part in some ways, whether willingly or not, but they still have to live with the things that they've done, and other people still hold them responsible for those things. The Evoli still hold them responsible for those things, despite the fact that they know that they were brainwashed, but just that they cannot have these people in their society because they don't want to risk their own people. And so those are some of the things that they have to confront. It's not just, they can't excuse them away by saying, oh, well, I was being controlled by this AI. Because even though that excuse exists, they still did those things. They still have to
yeah.
live with them, and other people still hold them responsible.
And the
And so,
Evoli have a very different culture as well, because they can feel what other people feel. So that means like those deaths are not just like countless tallies from far away, like they feel every single death.
yeah.
So there's a lot of character development here. Obviously, I mean, it's a book, but
One would hope.
yeah, I was just really like excited to see the way that we got to delve even deeper and deeper into the POV characters' sort of psyches. Even though there are so many of them, it was amazing, like the balance there. That like each chapter is just so like rich with like emotion. So there's a lot of characters where, I mean, they have to like sort of face their weaknesses in the book, which another, again, that's like good practice in writing. But like, can you talk as writers, what does that allow you to do? Like, having Chloe have to be confronted by like her emotions, and Nyx, and I don't know if and it's not a spoiler, Nyx and her illness, and everyone with all of the blood that they've spilled, regardless of whether, regardless of why they did it. What does that allow you to do as writers, these internal conflicts?
Yeah, so first, I still can't quite believe we did a book with 7 points of view. And I don't think I am ever doing it again because I'm very proud with what we came up with, but good Lord, about halfway through, I was losing the will to live. But yeah, I think a lot of the time, like something we teach on the masters is you think about a character going from blank to blank. So like from selfish to selfless. And I think we kind of, not like super consciously but subconsciously thought about how each character needs to go on a change and a journey, and usually they have to confront like their fatal flaw or something like that. And so for example with Nyx, like she always really prided herself on her physical strength, on her prowess. She'd always been able to count on her body to do what she wanted it to do. And in book 2, that's not as clear cut anymore. And she really, really struggles with that because she's like, if I have been a weapon my whole life and now I am not a good weapon, then what am I? What is left? And same with Chloe, like if I don't have my anger, then what protects me? And so I thought it was really interesting to play around with that with all the different characters. One of my favorite character journeys in the book is probably Cato, who didn't get that much screen time in book 1, but he really gets a chance to shine in book 2, and he became one of my favorites. They're all my favorites though.
Such a so sweet.
Yeah, I kind of think that you know, in terms of character journeys, one of my favorite things about writing fiction is kind of basically being able to put, you know, it's like taking a person and then putting them in like the worst possible situation and saying like, okay, now how do you deal with that?
Have fun.
Which is why I get a bit defensive when people are just like, oh, this person did this terrible moral thing. Does Elizabeth May approve of murder? And it's just like, no, I mean, I really like playing around with you know, with different moral questions and kind of basically, if you craft like you know, a fully three-dimensional character and you drop them in any situation, whether or not it is, you know, whether it's taking over a spaceship, killing somebody, or writing a grocery list, you know exactly how they'll respond to each and every one of those situations. And so, you know, except that with the grocery list, it's like, okay, well, how are you going to compile a grocery list with, you know, somebody trying to like kill you? And I always like to go and, you know, take it up like, you know, several notches and basically make it like the worst thing that they've ever experienced, and seeing how that shifts their kind of morality, their sense of morality, and their sense about themselves. So is that something that I like to do with a lot of my characters and basically all of my books, is put them in extremely stressful situations and see how they deal with that situation in terms of like their morality. How does it change them, and then how do they deal with the fallout? Because sometimes they might be put in a situation where they have to do they do something that is considered to be morally bad. Do we lose Eris?
Oh no.
Lost Eris.
Yeah, keep speaking and hopefully they'll come back.
Okay. So they might have to do something that's morally bad, but then later, once that situation is completely done with, they, you know, have to deal with the conscience, their conscience, and the fallout of that certain situation. And one of the things that I really liked about the characters for that we wrote for this book was the fact that, you know, each of them have been through essentially like hell. And no, I know there's no more moderator. We're just gonna
no.
we're gonna go for this all by ourselves. We're having a conversation.
They'll hopefully come back. If not, I do have the questions open, so I have a cheat.
And so all of these characters are dealing with the events that have already happened, and so they've already kind of got to the tip of their journey, and we just shove them the rest of the way.
Sure.
What would do you
Here
have
comes
anything
Eris,
to
I
add?
think.
Eris, is she back?
Yeah. Hello, are you back? Oh, you're on your phone now, aren't you? I can tell by the shape. You're muted. Still muted. The joys of tech.
Eris, the audio isn't working.
That is frustrated face. Connecting to audio.
Yay!
Success?
Oh,
Yay!
okay. Oh my God, everybody. Oh, I'm so sorry about that.
That's fine. Are you on
yeah.
your phone now?
Yeah, I'm on my phone now.
Thought so.
My laptop is not connecting.
We just
so-
finished the last question while you
Okay.
were.
Great. So no one noticed the cut.
Yes, it's fine. No one noticed anything. It's fine.
Yeah. So my next question relates to this sort of question of moral compromise and this sort of morally gray characterization that we love so much. There are some really deep moral and ethical questions in both of these books, I think. How do you go about like writing stories that tackle these complex questions? Because they're philosophical, but they're also very real. How do you write these questions while retaining a solid emotional core?
Good question. I think one of the main benefits of fiction and why we gravitate towards that rather than reading philosophical texts for fun as much, I mean, some people do, is because you can't really offer up a straightforward answer, because then your story just becomes preachy and didactic. So the cool thing about fiction is that you have like a core theme, and then you have all these characters who are reacting in different ways to that ethical question or that theme, and showing different viewpoints. And you can, oh no, I'm in darkness again. There we go. What was I saying? Darn it, technology. So yeah, like people can have, yeah, different responses to it. You juxtapose these different viewpoints, and then by having that kind of dialogic approach, you get to, like the reader gets to unlock the meaning for themselves, which I think is powerful. You don't want to make them passive or anything. Yes, I know. I love the word juxtapose. It's one of those like SAT words. And so I think still it all ultimately has to come back to character. Like, is your character talking about this moral and ethical question because it's something that's really relevant to their lives? Otherwise, you just have these like little mouthpieces walking around and like pontificating about the nature of reality or whatever. So I think, yeah, like to try and answer those questions, you still have to always bring it back to why that character cares, and how can you then make the reader care as a result.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that I really enjoyed about having, you know, multiple points of view characters, although 7
Very good. Oh my god. It's like
okay, I mean, there were
more flashbacks.
Okay, we have like 7 characters in one room. And I mean, they were challenging to write, but at the same time, they were really useful for discussing the way that each character views the certain morals, the morality around certain situations, and then they all argue about it.
Yeah, and insult each other. There's some great insults.
Yes, and then they all insult each other, and you know, then sometimes their past comes up, and it just turns into, you know, a situation where it's like you've got somebody being like, you know, no, I am not doing, you know, this particular thing because of this thing that happened in my past, and I really just do not want to even confront it. And then you'll have somebody that agrees with that person, and then somebody else that comes, you know, is just like, yes, but we must, you know, we have to. And so it becomes a, you know, a matter of like, you know, obligation to the team, but also, you know, you need to be able to kind of confront your various fears and your ideas of morality in different ways. And you know, and that's why they, you know, I really enjoy actually writing those discussion scenes, not just because, you know, as a writer, they're quite challenging. It's quite challenging to write different perspectives in the same scene when there are 7 people in one room.
And you realize like, oh shoot, this like character has just like disappeared. What are they doing? Where
It's
have
like,
they gone?
what does
is
Mia think in this situation? You know, and
I'm very
like,
quiet.
there's always like, you know, a few of the loud characters because they have extremely like, you know,
Opinions.
clear opinions and sense of morality. Chloe is just extremely like, no, absolutely not in this situation, not doing this. And Ariadne is just like, oh, you know, okay, if it'll help the team, I guess.
No fighting.
And then Eris is just like, you know, oh, this is gonna be like shit show, all right. And then Nyx is just like, I actually don't want to do any of this.
And Rhea's like, and then Rhea plays peacekeeper a little bit and tries to calm everyone down.
Somebody is just like, what does Rhea think? And Rhea's just like, comes in with like this nice response where she plays the peacekeeper, and then that's what happens. And I really enjoy those scenes because it's like, it's a situation where everybody gets to voice what they think in terms of like, you know, is this a moral thing to do? Will it get us killed? Will this make things worse? And, you know, some people, what the great thing is that if you have characters that are very clear and very clearly written in your mind, you know exactly how they will respond to that thing. And then you get to kind of compromise between them, which is always, you know, it's always fun. And then they get to take on different roles. And that's sort of
Yeah, I think it was, yeah, quite interesting because, yeah, like with Chloe, she's used to seeing herself as morally righteous,
Mhm.
especially in contrast to Eris. And I really enjoyed watching both of them sort of become, yeah, Eris is my favorite, and I feel weird saying that because for obvious reasons. But yeah, but I really
Gee,
liked
I wonder why.
yeah, developing chemistry. So uh, let's pivot a little bit and talk about world building now, and specifically gender stuff, which I was super excited to see played with in a really big way in this book. So can you both talk about a bit about the role that gender and gender dynamics play in the story?
Yes, my favorite thing. So we have kind of different ways that we went about it. So you see, obviously Kyla is now a point of view character, whereas she wasn't that much in book one, and she is trans. And so we had kind of a difficult balance when we first realized, oh, okay, we have to have flashbacks, and that's going to be when she is kind of forced to present as male. And we were both like really immediately gung-ho about like, let's not misgender this character and let's find a way to get around that. And I think we came about it in an elegant way. And those are some of my favorite scenes as well, when you can see like, there's a line that I think you wrote, Elizabeth, that's like, I am not two chromosomes spit out by chance. And I was just like, oh yes, good line. And then we also have Chloe, who's kind of starting to realize some gender feelings. And then also we have the Evoli as a society, who just in general have a very fluid understanding of gender and don't really adhere to the binary. Whereas in the Thelosian culture, it's incredibly binary, and there is not any room for deviation from whatever the Oracle has designated you to be. And so we really have lots of characters just challenging, like, am I what society has told me I should be, and what my role in terms of gender should play. And you also get, you know, like toxic masculinity is kind of looked at in certain ways. And so, yeah, I think gender definitely comes to the forefront in book two. And I really enjoyed exploring that.
Yeah, and I think that you know, it was an interesting and really, really sort of fun thing that Laura and I both wanted to be able to do in this book, because we do discuss it a bit in Seven Devils, and I think for this one we really wanted to talk about the ways in which how would the characters kind of deal with you know, if the Thelosian binary did not exist, you know, what would they present as? And you know, and Kyla was able to kind of you know, have that situation kind of in her mind where she was being forced to present as you know, as male, and the ways in which that kind of just really made her feel like she was dying inside. And and those flashback scenes were really difficult to write in that regard, because they were so intensely personal to her, and just and so different from the what the other characters kind of like had to deal with within the context of the Empire, because all of her pain was so internalized. And this was just like, it essentially kind of came down to like her sense of self and her sense of identity. It wasn't necessarily just being controlled by an AI, but the fact that she felt as if like herself was dying, and she had to escape in order to essentially save herself. And you know, that was, it was just such a very, you know, kind of heartbreaking and emotional thing to write. um and one thing that you know, I one of the ways that made me feel a bit like that it was that I really enjoyed as well was the fact that as opposed to Kyla, Chloe was, you know, in a situation where she was supported. Um, and so you have these two completely different situations where, you know, you have questions of gender and questions of, you know, being assigned based on the chromosomal level. And these, you know, and one character is essentially like, you know, oh, are my friends going to support me because they're so used to this specific binary existing, and then they do, and it's just like, oh my god, you mean that I can be who I feel inside? While, you know, Kyla had to live with all of that suppressed, and then was finally able to escape. And but it's still like she fears having to go back to that sense of dying, and that is her greatest fear. And so these are two really great character moments that we were able to explore. And I really I enjoy writing them just because they allowed us to discuss the way that gender is approached in the world, but it also allows us to kind of you know, explore how the differences in support systems as well.
Yeah, the difference between dysphoria and euphoria.
Mhm.
Sorry, somebody above me is just like banging on the wall or something. I just wanted to say for the audience, we're going to start taking audience questions in about 5 minutes. So if you have any, you can put them in the Q&A. We've got about 2 questions that I can see. We've got
7.
about 3 questions that I can see. It's deleted some of mine. So if
Oh,
somebody
okay.
wants to enter some of those again, I don't know why it deleted them.
Oh, probably because
really.
it kicked you out, maybe.
Yeah, it's because it kicked me out. Very strange. So I see ones from Matthew, Ahmed, Reese, and Emily, but I don't see the others. So maybe if Matthew or Anne could put those. But I'll have one more question for you guys to answer from me while we wait for more questions to come in, if that's okay. I wanted to talk a little bit about the Evoli. Since we finally got a good look at them in this book, it was so exciting to like actually see them after they had been sort of hinted at as this like other presence throughout Seven Devils. So how did you go about developing their world and culture?
Yeah, so we'd set a lot of the groundwork in book 1, which was helpful. But the interesting thing about the Evoli is that they were fundamentally once Thelosians, but because of where they settled, they started to change and they decided they wanted to break away. And so there's this rich backstory that we developed, and we had to think about, okay, how are they reacting as a result of this very long ongoing war, and there was this truce that went very badly in Seven Devils, and they're having to react to that and sort of like play nice with the Empire, but also still clearly distrust them, and just how they would, thinking about, we imagined what would it be like if you could sense emotion from everyone around you. How mistrustful would you be if you were suddenly around someone where you couldn't, or they couldn't sense you, and you would have that disconnect of just communication and empathy and understanding. And so it was really interesting to create their world and try and imagine what sort of buildings would they live in, how would they lay out their society, what would their government be like, how would it actually work. So in this book you have that the Oversoul is about to ascend, and so they're in this kind of situation of change, and it's kind of a fraught period, but really like interesting because it shows some of the cracks in that society as well. And you have Chloe coming in as an outsider completely, and then you have Rhea who has studied this culture her whole life, and they're both noticing different things, and some are drawn in more, some are more mistrustful. And so it was really interesting to contrast that with the Thelosian Empire that we'd already built up.
Yeah, I think Laura did a lot of the world building for the Volley.
I do love world building.
And we did sort of, we didn't want to have this sort of thing where we had like a good empire and a bad empire.
Yeah.
Because ultimately both are extremely flawed. But we wanted to kind of approach the Voli Empire in a way that was fundamentally different from the Thessalonians, because we didn't want them to be, we didn't want them to be the same. Because they are really they've been fighting each other for so long, so we wanted to make sure that there were kind of reasons behind it. And so that the Evoli really have built their kind of entire society around withstanding the Thessalonians. So they're really like almost a defensive kind of people, and so they've built their technology around defending themselves against the Thessalonians, because the Thessalonians just simply have more people. And so, but they are like all mentally kind of connected to one another through this sort of empathic
Unity.
yeah, it's called the Unity. And that was really interesting to explore, because of this idea of sensing everybody's emotions, sensing everybody being born, sensing everybody dying. And what would that do to a person? And in some ways, Chloe was a bit freaked out because essentially, the idea of Chloe losing her sense of self is something that terrifies her. And that's something that would probably terrify many of the people throughout the Thessalonian Empire, because they've already essentially lost their sense of self. So for Chloe to be in the Voli Empire and essentially kind of watch all of these people connected to one another, and the idea of Rhea possibly joining that, it's like, we already had our sense of self taken away in the Thessalonian Empire. Why on earth would you want to do that again to other people? Even though it's in a completely different situation, but it's that sort of idea of losing your identity, losing your autonomy in favor of the whole, because Chloe refuses to trust any kind of situation where that happens, because her sense of self is like hers. It's everything that she's fought for.
Yeah.
And so that was such an interesting thing to explore, because for Rhea, it's like, no, I love this idea of home and connected
Belonging. Yeah.
belonging, whereas Chloe is like, but we already belong, and we can keep ourselves with our friends. And so that was more questions that we were able to kind of approach and discuss. And and that was it was super fun and interesting to build that.
Yeah.
It was very fun and interesting to read as well.
Good. That was the hope.
So let's start on some audience questions. So I've got the first four that were asked that my phone deleted. So I'm gonna go and look at those now. So the first one, there's quite a few, so I don't know if we'll get to all of these, but maybe we'll do brief answers to as many
we'll
as
try
possible.
and do snappy ones.
Cool. So the first question from Ocean, and I guess the challenge here is to no spoilers. How did you decide on that ending for Seven Mercies? And I'm a little curious about that myself.
What would make readers hurt the most?
Oh my God, fuck you guys. Am I allowed to say that?
Yeah. We're like, what would be the most heart-wrenching? That one. Okay.
Oh, come on.
Kind of, a little bit. I'm doing the flippant answer. Elizabeth can do the less flippant answer.
Okay, but I mean, with the ending, it was something where we were just like, okay, we really love the idea of hope. We love, we don't want to make everything too bleak, but at the same time, we can't make everything too ideal and happy, because that's just not what the kind of story that this is. So we decided that we would have this marriage between the two and have it bittersweet.
Yeah.
And I succeeded.
Yeah.
Next question. would you ever write a spin-off story about Xander? I love him. I think he's quite a popular character. I quite like him. Not from Ocean as well.
We haven't
Maybe a
discussed
short
it or
story?
considered it really.
Mhm.
I think it'd be hard to pull off because everyone knows the ending. That's the problem with spin-offs and prequels.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it would be fun to kind of think more about what happened with Xander and Eris in those years, those intervening years that
Yeah.
we kind of gloss over in Seven Devils. It would just, I think it would just be immensely sad knowing
Yeah, it would be pretty sad, yeah.
Yeah, I feel like there's a lot of potential there for some quite heart-wrenching, smaller scale short fiction or something. So there's another question here from Carolina. It's about working together, which is a perennial question, but one I'm very interested in. How do you split the work? Do you alternate, or do you each take a point of view that's yours, or what?
First, someone said AO3. So yes, if anyone wants to write fan fiction about Xander, they can go ahead and go wild, but as far as I'm concerned. But in terms of practicality, we kind of figured out our system pretty well in Seven Devils, and then in Seven Mercies, I feel like we kind of cemented our co-writing process a lot better. So we now know that we kind of divide and conquer. So like we'd for each first drafted 2 characters each, and then we shared the other 3. And we made an incredibly detailed outline. I forget how many thousands of words long it was. It was very long.
Wait, was it 30,000 or it might have been 50,000?
It was at least 25,000 at least. And it was incredibly detailed. So we knew, and we were physically in the same space when we did that. So we could talk things out, or be like, this doesn't feel right. What do you think? Like initially we sent someone else to the Evoli. Remember that? And then we were like, wait a second, why have we done that? And we took that away and we changed who went
Wait,
to Eve.
who did you send?
Like a really random minor character who did not need to go.
Oh, okay.
I can't remember. There were other characters that existed and we took them out.
Yeah. We were kind of, yeah, I don't know what we were thinking, but at least we noticed that before we'd written the whole book. And then, yeah, so we just kind of divided and conquered and put it into Google Docs and hoped it wouldn't lag too much.
We did alternate chapters as well. I mean, because if you notice the like there are certain characters that kind of they go with like who wrote the chapter. So it's like if you look at the odd chapters, they're mostly like the characers that I wrote. And
and I did mostly the even ones, not always.
They correspond with like Laura's characters. So it's like Eris is like an odd chapter, and then Chloe will be an even chapter, and then like Nyx will be an odd chapter, and then Rhea will be an even chapter.
Yeah, because Elizabeth took the lead on Ariadne and Eris. I took the lead on Chloe and Rhea, and then we shared the other 3 somewhat evenly, I think.
Yeah,
I don't remember anymore.
I think it was like, I think we split Kyla and Keto pretty evenly, and then I don't know.
Yeah, I definitely did a couple Nyx chapters, but yeah, I don't know. It's all blurred. It's been a while.
I actually do think we did split Nyx down the middle.
I think we did, yeah. But then the thing is that we do edit over each other a lot. So we have our fingerprints on literally every chapter. And, we've gone over it so many times together that there are certain lines where I'm like, oh yes, Elizabeth definitely wrote that. I remember that. And then I'll be like, okay, yeah, I wrote that. And then there's a bunch of it where I'm like, I have no idea who wrote this. I have no memory.
So I guess that leads nicely into a question from Ahmed. Which character would you each say you identify with the most, if you had to pick?
I think I identify with all of them in different ways, but probably I guess the most with Chloe, just because we dreamt up Chloe and Eris first, I think, and so we spent the most time with them. But I think there's definitely a lot of me and Rhea. There's a lot of me and all of them, I think, and yet none of them are remotely like me. They're all braver than me.
Yeah, I kind of feel the same way. I mean, I don't want to like automatically say Eris since she's the most morally compromised. That would be my problem.
I don't think you would do a lot of what she did.
And I think that people I think I might like automatically associate myself the most probably with Ariadne. But I mean, I just say that like as in terms of like the most, but yeah, I think I see myself in all of them as well.
Yeah, and I guess that's part of like, making a character real is you give them each something that you've really
Yeah,
experienced.
I think every character you create in any book has a little piece of you inside, even if they end up being nothing like you. But even the villains and stuff too, I put things I don't like about myself in my villains all the time.
Oh my God, I loved reading Damocles. Like, I absolutely loved the scenes that he was in. I
He's such a
actually
shitbag.
adored
An asshole.
He
I
was
don't know
fun
what
to
it was.
write because he's just so awful, but you can understand a bit why he's awful, and that's what makes him interesting. Like he
Like,
is
yeah, he was so
irredeemable, but you still find yourself feeling like a little bit sorry, and then you're like, no, I shouldn't. He's awful.
You can feel
Yeah.
sorry for him and be like, he took that like way past.
Yeah,
what
dude
needed.
should have had
Yeah,
some therapy.
honestly, men will literally create a multi-galaxy empire rather than going to therapy.
Yeah, pretty much. Sorting out his daddy issues.
Yeah. Oh God. So
Tear down his sister's statues.
Yeah,
yeah,
so petty.
there's
Let me
no
rename
confidence.
it after myself.
This town that
Um,
my sister conquered, I will rename it for me. Damocles the hero. I wrote that bit. I was just like, that is definitely
I
something.
read it and I was just like
Yeah.
snickering.
Mm. So Matthew wants to know, how did you arrive at 7 characters? And I feel like I knew this, but I don't actually know the answer anymore.
By
Apart
accident.
from that Florence and the Machine song.
Yeah, kind of by accident, because we initially were like, well, this is going to be our take on Mad Max Fury Road in Space, which had
Yeah.
5 characters. So that was sort of how we kind of came up with the core 5. But then just by nature of like, there's a bigger revolution or rebellion, we probably need people in charge of that. So that's where Kyla and Cher came in. And Kato turned up later. I guess he was sort of like the, what's the name?
Mad Max character.
Yeah, the Mad Max character. So yeah, it kind of ended up being 7, but it's funny because people are like, is this a retelling of like Blake 7 or 7 Against Thebes? And we were like, no. Well, it was funny. It was really funny looking up 7 Against Thebes on Wikipedia. And I was like, huh, we did it by accident because there are no new ideas. It's all in the ether.
Nope.
So we're almost out of time, but I wondered if both of you could say a little bit about what we can expect from you next.
Yeah. So I'm currently finishing or trying really hard to finish an epic fantasy with dragons.
Dragon Book.
Yeah, Dragon Book. It's currently kicking my butt, but it's starting to at least look like an actual book, so that's good. And then I'm also in between drafts on a book based on 3 generations of my family, and it has no speculative elements aside from like some fairy tale illusions I snuck in because I couldn't help myself. And I'm writing that sort of with my mom as well, which is fun. Hi, Mom.
Let's see. Last year I finished a fantasy that's currently on submission with editors in the US. And so past that, I'm mostly getting into like romantic fantasy, like fantasy romance, and I've got a few ideas that I'm really excited about that I don't want to give too much away about, but they are retellings of things that I am interested in retelling. If you've looked at my Twitter, you probably know what they are. But I will have more information about that soon, hopefully.
Amazing. And I love a good retelling, so I can't wait to see what you do with them. I've been informed by our very gracious and benevolent hosts that we are allowed to go 3 minutes over. So I have one more question from Hannah, which is, what are the best things that you bring out in each other as writers?
Aw, Hannah is who we dedicated 7 Devils to, along with, yeah. So I think I think we complement each other in really nice ways because like we have different strengths that we draw on, and we also challenged each other a lot. So I definitely feel like I learned better dialogue techniques from Elizabeth because I think she's really good at that. Whereas I didn't think that was as much my strength. Whereas I really love to do like long descriptions, sometimes too long. And yeah, so I think we both learned a lot about craft, especially how to balance so many characters in a plot that doesn't sag and just kind of keeps along at a steady clip. So I feel like we both like leveled up as a result of working together, and we were we were able to kind of be more maybe ambitious than we would try and do on our own, because I think like if you told me go forth and write a book with 7 point of view characters, I would have been like, haha, no.
Yeah, I do think writing together made us more willing to approach and tackle that many characters where I would not have done that before. And without that kind of experience, because the book that I just finished last year has 5 points of view characters, and I don't think I would have done that if I hadn't already written 7.
Yeah. Dragon Book has now snuck up to 4, and I'm like, darn it. I was trying so hard to keep it at 2, and then it became 3.
I
and now
love
it's
that you
4.
both were just like, no, no more than 2, no more than 2. And then I was like,
It's like pushing characters out of the frame. Get out.
and then I was like, yes, I'll just do 5. That's God, why?
Yeah. Yeah, Phil mentioned that I'm too modest because someone did do a thread on my dialogue, but I wrote Goldilocks after I wrote Seven Devils. So I'd learned from the great Elizabeth and then applied it.
Well, thank you both so much. I think that's just about all we have time for, but I wanted to thank both of you, Elle and Elizabeth, for being here tonight. And I wanted to thank Matthew and Anne for doing tech and like supporting me in my technological failure. And thank you all to the audience. Thank you all so much for joining us. This feels like the third of about like 10 million digital events that we've done together.
I know.
But I'm really
And more to
happy
come.
that we could, yeah, and more to come, that we could make it, well, hopefully enjoyable for everybody. And I had a really good time, and we could had people joining us from the States and Canada and India, which was really exciting. So thank you all so much.
Thank you,
And
everyone, for showing up. We really appreciate it. Thank you to Eris for chairing. Thank you to Will and Blackwells and Anne and everybody. Yeah, so I hope you enjoy Seven Mercies, and thanks for spending time in our universe.